Well, good afternoon from Idaho. Alpine guy here. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the Lippert 6-point hydraulic level up system that also operates your hydraulic slides on your Alpine. I've already discussed in other videos a lot of the electronic sections, the forward level up controller, remote rear sensor, the level up panel itself, dual polarity solenoid that you see here in the picture, of course the pump motor, and the hydraulic valves that you see up there. And today what I'm going to do is just focus strictly on the fluid dynamics and how the system basically operates to either extend or retract the landing gear, or extend or retract the hydraulic slides. So basically on your Alpine with the Lippert 6-point level up system, you have two front landing gear, and then you have on each side a mid and rear leveling leg. The front landing gear that you see here are connected to each other. In other words, they're in tandem, but they're independent from the rest of the hydraulic system. The mid and rear leveler jacks on each side are also connected in tandem to themselves, but are controlled separately from left to right side. Basically what happens is when this hydraulic pump gets the signal to run counterclockwise, what that's going to do is extend whatever hydraulic valve opens up. And so in this case you see three valves from left to right. The first two valves, and we'll zoom in just a little, the very first two valves control the left and rear, or excuse me, the left and right side mid and rear leveling legs only. This third hydraulic valve that you see on the far right side controls only your hydraulic slides. When we look on the front landing gear, you'll notice there is also a hydraulic valve. All of these hydraulic valves, their normal position when nothing is running, they are mechanically closed by internal spring pressure inside the hydraulic valve itself. The assembly that you see slipped over the top with the electrical connection is nothing more than an electric solenoid. It's a magnet, if you will. When it's energized, it opens the internal workings of the hydraulic cartridge itself and unseats it to allow fluid to flow. When there's no power to it, to any of the hydraulic valves, then no fluid can flow, and that particular system, be it the front landing gear, the mid and rear leveling legs on either side, or the hydraulic sides, none of those will move. Controlled by these hydraulic valves. And so when we look up on this manifold, you see all these orange lines hooking up. This manifold is the extend manifold, and you also have another manifold with the black lines on it, and that's your retract manifold. And up on the top you'll see a little brass fitting with a blue top on it, and that is simply the hydraulic pressure switch. And the only time that that functions is if you're doing retract all, and what it does is when the hydraulic pressure reaches a given point of around 2200 psi, this would open up and stop the hydraulic pump from working. So let's take the front landing gear for an example. If I'm going to extend the front landing gear, then I would be over at my level up panel, and I would operate this front landing gear, which is going to send an electrical signal to this solenoid, which is going to open up that hydraulic cartridge valve that will allow fluid to flow between the extend and the retract lines. Each one of these cylinders from top to bottom has it's a dual piston. In other words, you have hydraulic pressure on one end and hydraulic pressure on the other end. And so if the extend side is getting all of the actual hydraulic pressure, then the fluid is going to flow through that side of the cylinder itself, and that hydraulic fluid pressure is going to push on that piston, and it's going to extend this leg. And what folks forget or get misunderstand is right now this landing gear is extended. And so I have hydraulic fluid and pressure on the extend side of this cylinder that's inside this front landing gear that you cannot see. And so when I want to retract this solenoid again has to open to allow the fluid to flow. And what's going to happen then is the fluid is going to flow through the retract side, and it's going to actually push upwards on this side of the cylinder that you can't see inside, and it's going to push this piston and assembly back up. And the fluid that was pushed down when it was extended has to be able to go somewhere. And so what has to happen is the solenoid valve has to open so that the fluid can flow back through this extend side and back into the reservoir as this landing gear retracts. And we're looking at the passenger side mid-leveler. That mid-leveler is also connected in tandem to the rear leveler. And when we zoom way back here, you can see, in fact, that there are a set of lines. Those lines run all the way up to the passenger side mid-leveler, and then on up to the extend and return block manifolds. You also notice one more line on the back side. And what that line runs to is that is a return line or retract line, and it runs over to the driver's side rear leveling leg. But right now we're still on the passenger side and we're looking at the rear leveling leg, and you'll notice the one black line all by itself, and it passes through the frame. And where that line goes is it runs across underneath the coroplast and it runs over to the driver's side rear leg, and I'll show you that. Now we are behind the driver's side rear leveling leg, and you can see there is that black return line that came from the passenger side rear leveler leg, and it in fact connects to the driver's side rear leveler's leg. We're still looking at the driver's side rear leveler's leg, and you see an orange and a black line, and those run forward through the frame all the way up to the driver's side mid-leveler leg. And here is a view showing you those two lines. And so all four of the leveling legs, mid and rear, both driver's side and passenger side, they're all actually interconnected on that return line or retract black line that again runs from the driver's side rear leveling leg over to the passenger side rear leveling leg, as you can see right there in the picture, and then that continues forward to the passenger side mid leveler leg, and from there both the extend and the retract or return lines run up to the manifolds respectively. And in this case, we'll zoom out a little bit, that black line is going to connect up to, and I'm not going to show you exactly which one, but it's going to connect up to one of these black return lines on this return manifold. Conversely, the extend lines for the mid and rear leveling legs on the passenger and the driver's side are right here and here, and those are both controlled by these two hydraulic valves. And so for fluid to flow, either during extend or during the retract cycle, those valves have to open accordingly. And that's basically the concept of how this system works. The sequence of which valve opens when and for how long is all determined by the front forward controller, which is located up in your front cargo bay up high on the back wall. And again, I have other videos that show you the exact location and explain how that operates. And so we'll sit down here on the bench in the shade, looking at the Alpine. Its next project is to get a much needed bath after the winter. The birds and the dust and the rain and the snow and everything, and we'll be getting that cleaned up here next week, getting ready for our first trip out. But back to the intent of the video. So what I've tried to show you is how that fluid flows through the extend and retract lines. Again, your extend lines are identified by the orange color. The return or retract lines are identified by the black color. All the fluid flow is controlled via those 4 hydraulic valves that I showed you. Again, you have 3 that are on your extend manifold. The extend manifold is identified by looking at the lines connected to it. They're all orange lines. That tells you that's the extend manifold, and that sends the hydraulic pressure to either the mid and rear leveler legs on the passenger side or the driver's side, or it sends hydraulic pressure to the main hydraulic slides, or it sends hydraulic pressure to the front landing gear. And again, the front landing gear has its own hydraulic valve located directly on one and one only front landing gear. Usually it will be found on the passenger side. And so the intent of this video is just to give you a basic understanding of how the fluid flows back and forth and how important those hydraulic valves are. And if one of those hydraulic valves fails, in other words, again, the normal position of all those valves when they're not energized is closed. They're closed by spring pressure. That spring pressure shuts off the flow of hydraulic fluid to the connected item, which can be either the front landing gear, the passenger or driver's side mid and rear leveling legs, or the hydraulic main slides. And so if you start to operate, for an example, the front landing gear, because you're getting ready to unhook your pickup truck and you notice that the hydraulic slides are starting to extend, that's going to tell you one thing very quickly. And specifically, what that's going to tell you is that you have a problem with the hydraulic cartridge valve for the main hydraulic slides. Either it is stuck open slightly, in other words, the internal spring pressure was not able to close the poppet valve and stop the flow of fluid, or the manual override screw on the very end of that hydraulic cartridge is slightly cracked open, thus allowing fluid to flow. And if the fluid can flow, then even though you're only trying to operate the front landing gear, the fluid is going to say, hey, I've got another path to take, or if you will, I've got another off-ramp to take, and so I'm going to follow that path as well, and it's going to push that fluid, and it's going to push it through to your hydraulic slides and either extend them or retract them, depending on the mode that you're operating that front landing gear in. A lot of people have problems with one of the front landing gear starting to sag down, and then they notice that the other one does the same thing after the fifth wheel has set for a while. Well, the reason that happens is, again, those 2 front landing gear are connected in tandem by the hydraulic lines. And so whatever happens to one cylinder is going to happen to the other cylinder. And so if I have, for an example, the driver's side front landing gear, if I have an external fluid leak, or if I have an internal fluid leak, in other words, that cylinder for the driver's side front landing gear, if it's bypassing some fluid internally past the seal, that's going to also affect the passenger side front landing gear. And with your mid and rear leveling legs on both sides, you have to remember, I showed you that one black return line or retract line that crosses from the passenger side to the driver's side rear leveling legs. And so what happens is that connects all 4 of those hydraulic legs are connected on the return side. The leveling legs on each side are isolated from each other because they themselves are connected just to each other. In other words, the driver's side, mid, and rear leveling legs are connected together in tandem, and then the orange extend line for those two leveler legs runs directly up to that extend manifold, and fluid flow is controlled via its high deck valve. The same thing occurs on the passenger side. The mid and rear leveler legs are connected in tandem, and the extend fluid flow and return fluid flow then runs up to the retract manifold and extend manifold. And again, on that extend manifold, that's the one with the orange lines, you have a high deck cartridge for the passenger side also. And so if either one of those high deck cartridges is leaking internally, in other words, it didn't seat fully from its internal spring pressure because you've got some garbage and gunk inside the hydraulic system, or the spring on the valve itself has gotten bad, or if the manual override screw on the end of that cartridge is slightly cracked open, then fluid will flow, and so all of a sudden you're going to notice that the fifth wheel is not maintaining the level setting from side to side that you had. And the reason for this is because one or both of those high deck cartridges are leaking fluid and allowing fluid to flow, which is going to affect both sides. The other thing that can affect issues with the left or right, with the driver's side or passenger side mid and rear leveling legs is if either one of the mid and rear leveling legs on one side, for an example, the driver's side, if either the mid leveling leg or that rear leveling leg, if either one of them have an external fluid leak, or if the cylinder is bypassing fluid internally, it's going to affect both of those legs. In other words, they're both not going to hold the desired position that you had set, and it can also affect the other side because that fluid is leaking down. Reliability-wise, over the last 11 years that I've owned this Alpine, knock on wood, I have never had a high deck valve give me any problems. I've never had the hydraulic pump motor or the dual polarity solenoid give me any issues. I have had the level up control panel go nuts. In other words, when I opened up the panel and went to operate it, either I had no display or I would have a beeping sound. And what causes both of those issues usually is either you've had a glitch in the electrical system. For an example, you were connecting and disconnecting a battery, and when you do that, it takes the battery voltage off of the front forward control, which also sends power to that level up panel, and so that can affect it. And also a loose or dirty connection either at the level up control panel itself or the front forward control module where the level up panel gets its power. If either of those connections are dirty or loose, or you've got a little corrosion over the years, that will affect the operation of that. And so usually you can remove the cannon plug on those and then reseat them, clean them if necessary, reseat them, and then turn the system on, and usually it will restore normal operation. I'm fortunate, or at least I think I'm fortunate, in that my smaller 3010 2014 Alpine, all three slides are hydraulic, and I think that it's a very reliable system. The front bedroom operates on a cradle slide, and which means that its cylinder is actually mounted inside the bedroom underneath the bed. And then the main hydraulic slides, there are two big hydraulic cylinders, one for each side, and they're located up underneath the belly coroplast, roughly about right above where the spare tire sits, depending on the length of your fifth wheel. So there you have it, this old man's interpretation of how the Lippert hydraulic system works. It's hydraulic fluid flow. Again, every one of those cylinders is a dual action cylinder. And so you either have hydraulic pressure on the extend side, which pushes the ram out, or you have hydraulic pressure on the retract side, which pushes the ram back in. And so for the landing gear, if we're retracting, those cylinders that you see for me sitting here, those shiny piston cylinders, they're going to retract inside the cylinder housing assembly, and that fluid is going to be displaced through the extend side up through that high deck cartridge and back into the reservoir system. And so hopefully I haven't confused anyone. To me, in my mind, it's perfectly clear, but it's often hard to try to express to folks something that's meaningful and might be able to help them out if you're in a jam down the road. You do need to remember that if the hydraulic pump or the motor fails, or if the dual polarity solenoid fails, provided that you're carrying a cordless drill with a 1/4 inch drill bit and a 5/32 inch Allen wrench, you can manually override and operate all of the leveling legs and the front landing gear, as well as all the hydraulic slides. And so all you need is that cordless drill, 1/4 inch drive bit that's about 6 inches long, or preferably on a flexible extension, and then a 5/32 Allen wrench to open and close the manual override screw on the end of each of those high deck cartridges. Well, there you have it. We'll put this video together, put it up on the YouTube channel, and hopefully I haven't confused anybody. Hopefully it makes sense to somebody down the road if they get in a jam. That's all from the Alpine guy out here in Idaho.